The rain lashed against the window as 7-year-old Lily crouched in the darkened corner of the abandoned forest cabin, her small arms wrapped protectively around the trembling bundle of reddish fur. Outside, flashlight beams cut through the darkness, dancing between the trees as voices called her name. Lily Morgan. The beam of light swept across the cabin's grimy window, and she pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her heart pounding like a trapped bird's wings. "They can't take you away," she whispered into Rusty's pointed ear. "I won't let 'em." The creature looked up at her with those intelligent amber eyes that had captured her heart from the moment she'd found him shivering in the rain exactly 1 year ago today. That night she'd been certain she'd rescued a German Shepherd puppy. But now the truth hung between them like an uncrossable chasm. The cabin door creaked open, sending a shaft of light across the dusty floor. Lily held her breath as heavy footsteps entered. She clutched Rusty tighter, feeling his rapid heartbeat against her own. "Please." She prayed silently, tears welling in her eyes. "Please don't let him take my best friend away just because he's not what they thought he was." Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. In the small town of Oak Ridge, nestled against the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, 7-year-old Lily Morgan lived with her father in a modest house at the edge of Whispering Pines Forest. Lily wasn't like other children her age. Diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder at 4, she lived in a world partly her own, where words came difficult and eye contact even harder. Her copper-red hair and freckled face, so like her mother's, were often bent downward, focused on the pattern of her shoes or the texture of whatever object had captured her attention. Since Sarah Morgan's passing in a car accident just over a year ago, Lily had retreated further into herself, speaking rarely and only when absolutely necessary. The anniversary of her mother's death had passed just yesterday, marked by Lily placing a single wildflower on the kitchen table, a tradition she'd started on her own, and that broke her father's heart each time. Robert Morgan, a respected veterinarian at Oak Ridge Animal Clinic, was a man divided between grief and duty. At 42, the lines around his eyes had deepened considerably over the past year, his once purely brown hair now peppered with gray at the temples. His days were spent caring for the town's beloved pets, while his evenings were consumed with trying to reach his increasingly distant daughter. The framed photograph on his desk showed a happier time, Robert, Sarah, and a laughing 3-year-old Lily at the lake before the accident. Despite his professional knowledge of animal behavior, Robert found himself increasingly baffled by the complex needs of his daughter, whose therapist provided strategies that sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. The worn copy of Understanding Autism on his nightstand was dog-eared and highlighted, a testament to his determination to bridge the gap between them. Oak Ridge itself was changing around them. The once sleepy town of 5,000 was under pressure from developers who saw potential in its picturesque location. The forest that bordered the Morgan property, where generations of local children had played, was now marked with surveyor stakes and threatened by a luxury housing development. The town had divided into factions, those welcoming progress and potential economic growth, and those fighting to preserve the natural beauty and wildlife habitat that made Oak Ridge special. In this atmosphere of change and conflict, the Morgan family's quiet struggle continued, largely unnoticed by neighbors too preoccupied with their own concerns to notice the silent battles fought behind the blue door of the little house at the edge of the woods. The anniversary of Sarah Morgan's death had been marked by unusual silence, even for the Morgan household. Robert had taken the day off work, hoping to spend some healing time with Lily, but she'd remained in her room for most of the day, emerging only for meals and to place her customary wildflower on the kitchen table. As evening approached, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, reflecting Robert's somber mood. The weather forecast had warned of severe thunderstorms, and by dinner time the first distant rumbles could be heard. "Storm's coming in, lily pad," Robert said, as he placed a grilled cheese sandwich cut into precise triangles the way she preferred in front of his daughter. "We might lose power tonight." Lily nodded almost imperceptibly, her fingers tracing the edge of her plate in that familiar circular pattern. After dinner, Robert lit the emergency candles and placed flashlights in strategic locations throughout the house, a routine they'd perfected during previous power outages. By 8 o'clock, the storm had arrived in full force, rain hammering against the windows while lightning illuminated the sky in brilliant flashes, followed by thunder that shook the little house. Robert was checking the weather app on his phone when he realized Lily was no longer in the living room. "Lily?" he called, a note of concern in his voice. When there was no answer, he rose quickly, checking her bedroom, the bathroom, and finally the kitchen, where he found the back door slightly ajar, rain spattering onto the tiled floor. His heart racing, Robert grabbed a flashlight and rushed outside, calling her name. The rain soaked through his shirt instantly as lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating the yard and the edge of the woods beyond. There, near the old oak tree, stood Lily, her nightgown already drenched, staring intently at something on the ground. "Lily!" Robert shouted over the storm, splashing through puddles to reach her. "What are you doing out here? It's dangerous." As he approached, Lily turned to him, her expression more animated than he'd seen in months. She pointed to the ground, where something small and dark lay huddled against the tree trunk. "Hurt," she said, one of the few words she used regularly. "Help it." Robert directed his flashlight downward, revealing what appeared to be a small, sodden puppy, its fur so wet it was difficult to discern its color or breed. The creature was shivering violently, making pitiful whimpering sounds that tugged at Robert's heartstrings despite his concern about Lily being out in the storm. "It's a German Shepherd puppy, Dad," Lily said, forming the longest sentence Robert had heard from her in weeks. The surprise of hearing her speak so clearly momentarily overshadowed his concern about the storm. "Let's get you both inside," Robert replied, gently scooping up the trembling animal. It was surprisingly light, fitting easily in one hand while he used his other arm to guide Lily back to the house. Inside, Lily immediately ran for towels while Robert examined the puppy in the kitchen. It was indeed small enough to be a newborn German Shepherd, though something about its facial features struck him as unusual, perhaps a mix of some kind. Its eyes were still partially closed and its ears seemed disproportionately large for its head. "Can we keep him?" Lily asked, her voice clear and direct as she handed Robert a clean towel. The question and the direct eye contact that accompanied it stunned Robert. This was the most engaged he'd seen Lily since before Sarah's death. "He might belong to someone, Lily Pad," Robert said gently, carefully drying the tiny creature. "And we don't know if he's hurt or sick." "Rusty," Lily said decisively, pointing to the puppy's fur, which was beginning to dry, revealing a reddish-brown hue. "His name is Rusty." Robert couldn't help but smile at his daughter's rare display of assertiveness. "We'll call him Rusty for now," he conceded. "But just until we can find his owners or get him checked out, okay?" Lily nodded, her attention wholly focused on the puppy, who had begun to make small, unusual chirping sounds as it warmed up. Robert wrapped Rusty in a soft blanket and prepared a makeshift bed in a cardboard box, lined with a heating pad set on low. "He's hungry," Lily observed, as the puppy began to nuzzle against her hand. Drawing on his veterinary knowledge, Robert prepared some diluted evaporated milk in a small bottle meant for kittens. To his surprise, Lily immediately took over the feeding, displaying a gentle patience he hadn't witnessed before. Her usual sensory discomfort seemed forgotten as she held the wriggling puppy, guiding the nipple to its mouth. That night, after settling Rusty in his box in the kitchen, Robert tucked Lily into bed. For the first time in a year, she looked up at him with clear eyes and said, "Good night, Dad." Robert stood in the hallway afterward, listening to the storm recede into the distance, his mind swirling with emotions. Something had changed tonight. His professional judgment told him they couldn't keep a stray puppy permanently. It needed proper assessment, vaccinations, and its owners might be searching for it. But his father's heart had seen the first spark of his old Lily returning, and he wasn't sure he had the strength to extinguish it. In the kitchen, Rusty made that strange chirping sound again, a noise that didn't quite match any puppy Robert had treated in his 15 years as a veterinarian. But in his exhaustion and emotional state, he dismissed the thought. Tomorrow would be soon enough to figure out what to do with their unexpected visitor. The following week brought significant changes to the Morgan household. Robert had taken Rusty to the clinic for a proper examination, expecting to post found puppy notices around town afterward. But when no one claimed the small creature, and Lily's attachment grew more evident by the day, Robert found himself postponing the inevitable. Each evening he'd return home to find Lily sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, speaking softly to Rusty in full sentences that she rarely used with anyone else. But as days turned into weeks, Robert couldn't ignore the increasingly unusual behaviors Rusty displayed. On Wednesday morning, Robert woke to find Lily giggling a sound so rare it pulled him from bed immediately. In the kitchen, Lily pointed to the corner where Rusty had created a strange collection. Kibble from his bowl was meticulously hidden behind the refrigerator, stuffed into the gap between the stove and counter, and even tucked into the folds of the kitchen curtains. "He's saving his breakfast for later," Lily explained with unusual clarity, as though this behavior were perfectly normal. Later that evening, while reviewing patient files at the kitchen table, Robert noticed Rusty watching a moth that had flown in through the open window. The puppy stalked the insect with a grace that seemed oddly familiar, yet out of place, his body low to the ground, head perfectly still before pouncing with astonishing precision. It wasn't the clumsy batting of a puppy, but the calculated attack of a different predator entirely. "Lily, has Rusty been making any barking sounds?" Robert asked casually the next morning as he prepared breakfast. Lily shook her head. "He talks like this," she answered, and then produced a high-pitched chirping sound that sent a chill up Robert's spine. It was the same unusual vocalization he'd been hearing from Rusty's cardboard box at night, a sound no German Shepherd puppy should make. That weekend, Robert observed Rusty more carefully. The puppy now moved with surprising agility, scaling the back of the couch and balancing along its narrow edge like a tightrope walker. His face had elongated slightly, and his ears, larger than ever, tracked every sound with independent movements. Most telling was his tail, which had grown increasingly bushy and seemed to wrap around his body when he slept in a tight ball, unlike any dog breed Robert had ever treated. On Sunday night, Robert found himself scrolling through wildlife identification websites on his tablet, a growing suspicion taking shape in his mind. The more photos he compared, the more his professional training overcame his wishful thinking. Rusty's elongated snout, the slightly slanted eyes, the distinctive movement patterns, the food-catching behavior, and especially those vocalizations all pointed to one conclusion that Robert wasn't ready to accept. "It can't be," he whispered to himself, closing the tablet quickly when Lily padded into the living room in her pajamas. On Monday morning, Robert called his most trusted colleague at the clinic. "Margaret, I need your opinion on something unusual," he said after explaining the situation. "I want to run some DNA tests, but I wanted a second set of eyes first." That afternoon, Margaret examined Rusty carefully in Robert's private office, away from other clients. Her expression grew increasingly serious as she checked the creature's teeth, paw structure, and general morphology. "Robert," she said finally, setting Rusty down on the examination table, "I think you already know what I'm going to say. This is not a German Shepherd puppy. This isn't any kind of dog." "I know," Robert admitted, his voice barely audible. "It's a fox kit, isn't it?" Margaret nodded, her eyes sympathetic but her tone professional. "A red fox, I'd say. Probably only a few weeks old when you found him. The storm might have separated him from his mother." Robert ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. "I suspected it for days, but Lily's so attached." "She's speaking again, Margaret. Full sentences, direct eye contact. It's like Rusty unlocked something in her that's been shut down since Sarah died." "I understand," Margaret said gently, "but you know as well as I do that keeping a wild fox as a pet is illegal in this state. There are good reasons for those laws." "We'll do the DNA test to confirm," Robert said, already taking a cheek swab from the surprisingly cooperative Rusty. "Maybe he's a mix or a domesticated fox breed. There must be some explanation that doesn't end with taking him away from Lily." The next 3 days were the longest of Robert's life. He found himself watching Lily and Rusty together with a new awareness, seeing clearly what he'd been subconsciously denying. Rusty moved nothing like a dog, his movements more fluid and calculating. He preferred to hide under furniture rather than lie in open spaces. He startled at dogs barking on television. And when Lily took him into the backyard, he stared at birds with an intensity no puppy would maintain. "Dad, Rusty wants to climb the tree," Lily informed him matter-of-factly on Wednesday evening as the kit stood on his hind legs against the oak's trunk, claws digging into the bark. Robert just nodded, his throat tight with the knowledge of what the DNA results would confirm. On Thursday morning, the email arrived. Robert opened it in his office, the door firmly closed. The results were unambiguous, 100% Volp's red fox. No dog DNA whatsoever. With a heavy heart, Robert began researching wildlife rehabilitation centers and the legal ramifications of accidentally keeping a wild animal. The laws were clear and strict. Keeping a fox without proper permits was a misdemeanor offense with hefty fines. But more importantly, wildlife authorities could and would confiscate Rusty immediately upon discovery. Even with Robert's veterinary credentials, there were no easy exceptions. As Robert drove home that evening, his mind raced with possible solutions. Could he apply for a special wildlife rehabilitation license? Could he claim Rusty was too imprinted on humans to be released? Every avenue seemed to lead to the same conclusion: Rusty couldn't legally stay with him. Pulling into the driveway, Robert steeled himself for what might be the hardest conversation of his life. How could he explain to Lily, who had already lost so much, that the creature who had helped bring her voice back wasn't what they thought and couldn't stay? Inside, he found Lily and Rusty in their usual spot on the living room floor. Lily was reading aloud from her picture book another new development that had thrilled her teachers, while Rusty sat attentively beside her, those intelligent eyes fixed on the colorful pages as though understanding every word. "Lily," Robert began, his voice breaking slightly, "we need to talk about Rusty." Lily looked up, her expression open and engaged in a way it hadn't been for over a year. "He's not really a dog, is he, Dad?" she asked with unexpected clarity. "He's special." Robert sat down heavily on the couch, stunned by his daughter's perception. "Yes, Lilypad, he's very special. He's actually a fox, a wild animal." And that means he couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. Lily's face clouded, her expression closing off in that familiar way that tore at Robert's heart. "They'll take him away, won't they?" she whispered, instinctively pulling Rusty closer to her chest. The fox kit chirped softly, nuzzling against her arm as though sensing her distress. In that moment, looking at his daughter's face, Robert made a decision that he knew might have serious consequences. "Not if I can help it," he promised. "Not without a fight." Before Rusty's arrival, Lily Morgan had spent her days in near silence. Her autism diagnosis at age 4 had explained her developmental challenges, but nothing had prepared Robert for the additional regression that followed her mother's death. The specialists all said the same thing: Lily's withdrawal was a trauma response layered upon her existing communication difficulties. At school, she sat alone during lunch, her rigid routine untouched by the friendly overtures of teachers or the occasional curious classmate. She engaged with academic material well enough, excelling particularly in mathematics and memorization tasks, but the social-emotional aspects of education remained utterly foreign to her. Ms. Jenkins, Lily's first-grade teacher, had established a special signal system for Lily's needs. A red card placed on the corner of her desk meant she needed a sensory break. A blue card indicated bathroom needs. Words had become precious commodities for Lily, saved only for absolute necessity. But before Rusty, Lily averaged perhaps 10 spoken words per day, according to the communication log that Robert dutifully maintained for her therapy team. Home had been no different. The evenings stretched long and quiet, with Lily engaged in repetitive activities, lining up her collection of smooth river stones or arranging her books by color rather than title. Robert's attempts at connection were met with minimal eye contact and one-word responses. The worst were the meltdowns, overwhelming sensory experiences that left Lily screaming or curled in a ball beneath her weighted blanket, and Robert feeling helpless and increasingly isolated in his struggle to reach his daughter. The fox changed everything. Within days of Rusty's arrival, Lily's speech patterns began to transform. It started with simple narration, "Rusty hungry" or "Rusty sleeping." Soon these telegraphic phrases blossomed into complete sentences. "Dad, I think Rusty wants to go outside now," she announced one morning exactly 2 weeks after the stormy night. Robert nearly dropped his coffee mug at the complex sentence structure she'd produced without apparent effort. More remarkable still was the emotional connection. Lily, who had previously avoided physical contact even with her father, now spent hours with Rusty cradled in her lap, stroking his increasingly bushy fur with a gentle touch that demonstrated none of her usual tactile sensitivities. She laughed when Rusty pounced on his toys, a bright, musical sound that Robert had feared he might never hear again. The transformation extended beyond their home. 3 weeks after Rusty's arrival, Ms. Jenkins called Robert at the clinic, her voice vibrating with controlled excitement. "Mr. Morgan, I'm not sure what's changed at home, but Lily spoke in class today." Not just to answer a question, she raised her hand during sharing time and told a 2-minute story about her pet. The other children were captivated. Robert closed his office door before explaining about the puppy they'd rescued, careful to maintain the pretense that Rusty was an unusual dog breed, not a wild fox. He wasn't ready to share that complication, especially not when the results were so positive. By the 1-month mark, Lily's therapy sessions showed quantifiable progress. Her speech pathologist reported a 300% increase in spontaneous verbal communication. The occupational therapist noted significant improvements in fine motor control and sensory regulation skills Lily practiced while carefully preparing Rusty's meals or creating elaborate blanket nests that met his apparent standards for comfort. Most profound was the change in Lily's emotional availability. She began to transfer the empathy she showed Rusty to other relationships. "Dad, are you sad today?" she asked one evening, looking directly into his eyes with an intensity that brought tears to his. "Your face looks like how I feel when Rusty hides too long." This new awareness extended to her classroom. Ms. Jenkins reported that Lily had comforted a crying classmate by offering her stress ball and saying, "My Rusty helps me feel better when I'm sad. You can borrow this." It was the first unprompted social interaction she'd initiated at school in over a year. Dr. Patterson, Lily's developmental psychologist, was particularly interested in the relationship with Rusty, even requesting a home observation session. Watching Lily demonstrate her elaborate communication system with the fox, a system she'd developed entirely on her own, the psychologist took copious notes. "Animals can sometimes reach children in ways humans can't," she explained to Robert afterward. "There's no social complexity for Lily to decode with Rusty, no facial expressions to interpret or social rules to follow. He's consistent, non-judgmental, and responsive in ways she can predict and understand." What the psychologist didn't know, what Robert hadn't disclosed, was that the creature providing this miraculous therapeutic effect wasn't a peculiar dog breed, but a wild fox Moy. An arrangement that could be terminated by authorities at any moment. The thought kept Robert awake at night, even as he marveled at his daughter's blossoming. The first indication that their secret was vulnerable came 6 weeks after the storm. Robert was treating Earl Peterson's aging retriever for arthritis when the old man fixed him with a suspicious stare. "That ain't no German Shepherd pup your girl's got," Earl stated flatly, his weathered face set in stubborn lines. At 78, Earl was Oak Ridge's most notorious huntsman, with an encyclopedic knowledge of local wildlife and a collection of taxidermied trophies that children dared each other to view through his front window. Robert's careful denial only deepened the old man's frown. "Don't insult my intelligence, Doc. I've trapped more foxes than you've treated hamsters. Saw your girl playing with it in your backyard yesterday. That's a red fox kit, plain as day." Robert's stomach dropped. "Earl, it's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," Earl interrupted. "It's illegal, it's dangerous, and it ain't right. Wild animals belong in the wild. Please, Robert lowered his voice, though they were alone in the examination room. Lily's been through so much. Rusty has helped her in ways nothing else has. She's speaking again, Earl. Something flickered across the old man's face, perhaps recognition of the desperation in Robert's voice. Earl had known Sarah, had attended her funeral, had awkwardly patted Lily's head afterward with gnarled fingers that didn't know how to offer comfort. "The law's the law, Doc," Earl said finally, though his tone had softened slightly. "I'll give you some time to sort it out proper, but if that fox is still in your house next week, I'll have to report it. Wouldn't be right not to." Robert nodded, understanding the temporary reprieve for what it was. He finished treating the retriever in tense silence, his mind already racing through options that seemed increasingly limited. The situation escalated the following day when Lily's school became an unexpected battleground. During morning circle time, Lily had shared more stories about Rusty, including details that raised MS, Jenkins' professional concerns. The teacher called a discreet lunchtime meeting with the school counselor and principal, which might have remained private except for Kathy Williams, the administrative assistant with a notorious tendency to repeat confidential conversations. By afternoon pickup, whispers circulated among waiting parents. By evening, the school's private parent Facebook group erupted with debate. Some parents demanded immediate action, citing safety concerns about a household with a wild predator. The others defended the Morgans, pointing to Lily's obvious developmental progress and questioning whether authorities should intervene. The division wasn't surprising in a town already splintered by the forest development controversy. Those who favored preservation generally supported the Morgan situation, while development proponents cited the fox situation as another example of sentimentality overriding common sense and regulation. The debate spilled into public view when Meredith King, mother of Lily's classmate and staunch development advocate, called the local newspaper. The Oak Ridge Gazette wasn't exactly investigative journalism powerhouse, but the front-page headline, "Local Vet Keeping Illegal Fox as Child's Pet," sold more copies than any issue since the record blizzard of 2010. Robert found himself dodging calls and pointed questions when he took Lily grocery shopping. The checkout clerk gave him a disapproving frown, while the bag boy whispered, "My dad says what you're doing is cool, Dr. Morgan. Animals need advocates." Most disturbing was the impact on Lily, who sensed the tension without fully understanding its source. "Are people mad at Rusty?" she asked one evening, her voice small as she huddled next to the fox on the living room rug. "Some people don't understand," Robert answered carefully. "They think Rusty should live in the forest with other foxes." Lily's face crumpled. "But he's my friend. He chose me." The controversy reached its peak at the town council meeting that Wednesday. Though fox permits weren't on the agenda, the public comment period became a proxy battle over the Morgan situation. Robert sat rigid in the back row, having attended only to gauge community sentiment, while speakers on both sides claimed moral high ground. "If we allow people to keep wild predators as pets, where does it end?" demanded Howard Jenkins, the developer behind the Forest Project. "Mountain lions in the backyard, bears on the patio? Rules exist for public safety. The psychological well-being of a child who lost her mother should outweigh bureaucratic regulations," countered Eleanor Simpson, the retired elementary school principal. "I've witnessed Lily's transformation firsthand. What that fox has accomplished, no therapy has been able to achieve." The meeting adjourned without resolution, but it had accomplished one thing, drawing enough attention to the situation that official notice became inevitable. The knock came on a Tuesday morning. Robert had just returned from dropping Lily at school when he found a state-issued SUV in his driveway. The man who stood on his porch wore the olive green uniform of the Wildlife Protection Division, his badge identifying him as Officer James Thompson. "Mr. Morgan, I'm here about a reported wildlife violation at this address." His tone was professional but not unkind, his weathered face suggesting years of navigating difficult encounters. Robert's heart sank, but he nodded and invited the officer inside. No point denying what had clearly been reported by multiple sources. In the living room, Rusty had wedged himself beneath the couch at the sound of an unfamiliar voice, a behavior increasingly common as his natural fox instincts developed. "That would be the fox in question," Robert said, gesturing toward the visible russet tail. "His name is Rusty. My daughter found him during a storm about 2 months ago, thinking he was a puppy." Officer Thompson crouched down, making a soft clicking sound that surprisingly coaxed Rusty into view. The officer's practiced eye assessed the fox, noting his healthy condition and obvious comfort in the domestic setting. "He appears well cared for," Thompson acknowledged, straightening up. "But I'm sure you're aware that keeping a wild fox without proper permits is illegal in this state." "I'm a veterinarian," Robert said. "I've made sure he's healthy, vaccinated." "I understand, sir, but your professional qualifications don't override wildlife regulations." Officer Thompson pulled out a clipboard, his expression sympathetic but resolute. "This is an official warning notice. You have 14 days to either obtain proper wildlife rehabilitation permits, which are extremely difficult to get for private residences, or surrender the fox to authorized wildlife officials." Robert took the yellow carbon copy with numb fingers. "My daughter has autism," he said quietly. "Since her mother died last year, she's barely spoken. Rusty has changed that. He's reached her in ways nothing else has." Officer Thompson's face softened slightly. "I'm truly sorry about your situation, Mr. Morgan. But the law exists for good reasons. Foxes are wild animals with specific needs and natural behaviors that can become problematic in domestic settings. They can also carry diseases transmissible to humans." "He's been fully vetted," Robert insisted. "And he's completely bonded to Lily. He wouldn't survive in the wild. He doesn't have the skills." "There are wildlife sanctuaries that might be an option," Thompson offered. "Places where he could live safely while still being wild. I could provide some contact information." The thought of Rusty confined in a sanctuary, away from Lily, made Robert's throat tighten. "I'd like to apply for a special permit," he said firmly. "I believe there are exceptions for educational purposes or for animals too imprinted on humans to be released." Officer Thompson's eyebrow raised slightly, suggesting surprise at Robert's knowledge of wildlife regulations. "You can certainly apply. I'll include the forms with your warning notice. But I should warn you that such exceptions are rarely granted to private individuals." After Thompson left, Robert sat heavily on the couch, the yellow notice glaring accusingly from the coffee table. 14 days. 2 weeks to either find a legal solution or break his daughter's heart all over again. That afternoon, Robert began his research in earnest. He requested guidance from veterinary colleagues with wildlife experience, consulted with a lawyer specializing in environmental regulations, and began compiling documentation of Lily's developmental progress since Rusty's arrival. If there was a path to keeping Rusty legally, he was determined to find it. The permit application was dauntingly complex. It required detailed facility specifications, evidence of expertise in handling wildlife, educational or conservation justification, and multiple character references. Robert worked on it every night after Lily went to bed, assembling what he hoped was a compelling case for an exception. Dr. Patterson provided a formal assessment documenting Lily's remarkable progress, carefully framing Rusty as a therapeutic intervention for a child with significant trauma and developmental challenges. M.S. Jenkins contributed observations of Lily's classroom improvements. Even Margaret from the clinic wrote about Robert's exceptional qualifications for providing appropriate care. The most unexpected support came from Dr. Emily Waters, a wildlife biologist at the State University who had read about the case in the Oak Ridge Gazette. Her letter outlined research on fox behavior and suggested that an imprinted kit like Rusty would indeed struggle to survive if released, potentially making a controlled domestic environment the most humane option. 7 days into their 14-day window, Robert felt cautiously optimistic about their chances. He'd submitted the application and received confirmation it was under review. Then came the shattered glass. He'd been awakened at 3 a.m. by the sound of breaking windows. Rushing downstairs, he found a brick on the kitchen floor surrounded by shattered glass. Attached was a note with block letters, "Keep wild animals where they belong." Robert swept up the glass before Lily woke, but the incident left him shaken. The controversy had escalated beyond debate into potential danger. He installed a security system the next day, the expense straining his already stretched budget. That evening, Robert was reviewing the final paperwork for their permit application when he heard Lily's voice from the hallway, where she'd apparently been listening to his phone conversations. "Are they going to take Rusty away?" she asked, her voice trembling as the fox pressed protectively against her legs. Robert knelt down to her level, choosing honesty over false reassurance. "Some people think Rusty should live with other foxes, not with people. I'm doing everything I can to show them that he belongs with us, that this is his home now." Lily's face took on a determination he recognized from Sarah's most stubborn moments. "But they can't take him. I found him. He's mine." "I know, Lily Pad. I'm fighting for him, I promise." That night, Robert checked on Lily multiple times, a growing unease keeping him from sound sleep. Their 14 days were nearly half gone, and despite his efforts, he knew the odds were against him. Wildlife regulations existed for good reasons, and exceptions were rarely granted regardless of circumstances. As he finally drifted toward sleep, Robert heard Lily's voice through the wall, soft but clear as she spoke to Rusty in the darkness. "I won't let 'em take you away," she whispered. "If they try, we'll run away together. I promise." Robert closed his eyes, the innocent words sending a chill through him that had nothing to do with the night air. In trying to protect his daughter from one loss, he'd inadvertently set the stage for potentially greater trauma. Whatever happened next, he needed to prepare Lily for possibilities he couldn't bear to consider while still fighting with everything he had for the unlikely outcome they both desperately wanted. The 13th day after Officer Thompson's visit dawned with ominous clouds gathering on the horizon. Robert had been up most of the night, alternating between reviewing their permit application one last time and preparing himself for the increasingly likely outcome that Rusty would be removed from their home. He'd reached out to several wildlife sanctuaries, trying to find one that might allow supervised visits, but the responses were discouraging. Most facilities maintained strict policies against human interaction with rehabilitated wildlife. Robert had finally dozed off around 4 a.m., which explained why he didn't hear Lily moving about her room in the pre-dawn darkness. Had he been awake, he might have noticed the methodical way she filled her school backpack, not with books and folders, but with carefully selected items: a flashlight, her emergency whistle, a water bottle, Rusty's favorite blanket, and the package of jerky she'd secretly taken from the pantry. She dressed in layers despite the warm May weather, pulled on her sturdiest sneakers, and completed her preparations by writing a short note in her careful, oversized handwriting. "Dad, I took Rusty somewhere safe, don't worry." By the time Robert's alarm sounded at 6:30, Lily and Rusty were already deep in Whispering Pines Forest, following the creek path that Lily knew from weekend hikes with her father. The young fox trotted attentively at her side, occasionally darting ahead to investigate an interesting scent before returning to her. Unlike a dog that might wander, Rusty maintained constant awareness of Lily's position, a natural fox behavior that served their escape well. At 7:15, Robert knocked on Lily's bedroom door with his customary rise and shine lily pad. When there was no answer, he assumed she was still sleeping, not unusual given her difficulty with transitions in the morning. It was only when he returned 5 minutes later that he noticed the empty bed, the missing backpack, and the absence of Rusty's blanket from its usual spot on the floor. His heart rate accelerated as he called through the house, checking each room with increasing desperation until he found the note on the kitchen table, held in place by Lily's favorite river stone. "No," he whispered, reading the childish scrawl with mounting panic. Outside, the first fat raindrops began to fall, punctuating his fear as thunder rumbled in the distance. Robert called the school first, confirming what he already knew: Lily hadn't arrived. Next came the police, who responded with immediate concern given Lily's age and diagnosis. Within an hour, Robert's living room had become an impromptu command center for the search. Officer Martinez from the local police took detailed notes while Robert provided Lily's description, medical information, and likely destinations. "She's very intelligent," Robert explained, his voice tight with worry, "but she doesn't always understand danger the way other kids might. And she's absolutely determined to protect Rusty." "The fox?" Officer Martinez clarified, glancing up from her notepad. "Yes, we were down to our last day before the wildlife division would likely take him. Lily must have overheard something or figured it out." By noon, the storm had intensified, and the search had expanded to include volunteer firefighters, several neighbors, and even some of Robert's veterinary clients who had heard the news. The heavy rain complicated their efforts, washing away potential tracks and forcing searchers to shout over the downpour and thunder. Most concerning to Robert was the rising water level in the creek that ran through the forest, a usually gentle stream that could quickly become dangerous during flash flooding. At the edge of the forest, searchers divided into teams, each taking different trails with waterproof maps marked by Robert to indicate Lily's favorite spots. The police had brought search dogs, but the rain was hampering their ability to pick up a consistent scent trail. As afternoon crept toward evening with no sign of Lily, the local emergency management coordinator arrived to discuss expanding the search perimeter and bringing in additional resources. "We have about 2 hours of daylight left," he explained to a soaked and devastated Robert. "We'll set up floodlights and continue through the night if necessary, but our best chance of finding her is before dark." Robert nodded numbly, accepting another cup of lukewarm coffee from Eleanor Simpson, who had arrived with sandwiches for the search teams. "This isn't your fault," she told him gently, seeing the guilt etched across his features. "Any parent would have done what you did for their child." As the group discussed search strategies, an unexpected figure approached through the rain. Earl Peterson, dressed in full hunting gear, his weathered face set in determined lines. "I know these woods better than anyone," the old man stated without preamble. "I've been hunting them for 70 years. I'll find your girl, Doc." Before Robert could respond, Earl turned and disappeared into the trees, ignoring the official search protocols and coordinators' objections. Despite their fraught interactions over Rusty, Robert felt a surge of gratitude for the old hunter's confidence and intimate knowledge of the forest. While the search intensified near town, Lily and Rusty had traveled surprisingly far into the forest. The little girl's determination had driven her deeper along the creek trail than she'd ever gone with her father, beyond the familiar picnic clearing and past the old stone foundation that marked the remnants of a pioneer cabin. Rusty had proven an adept travel companion, staying close and occasionally seeming to guide her with subtle changes in direction, fox instincts perhaps recognizing safe paths through the increasingly wet forest. By mid-afternoon, however, the novelty of their adventure had worn thin. Lily was wet, hungry, and increasingly frightened by the thunder that boomed overhead. The creek beside the trail had swollen to twice its normal size, brown water rushing noisily over rocks that were usually exposed. When they reached a fork in the path, Lily hesitated, unable to remember which way led back toward town and which continued deeper into the wilderness. "I think we should go this way, Rusty," she decided finally, taking the right fork that seemed to climb away from the rising water. Had she chosen the left path, they might have circled back toward town, but the right fork led deeper into the forest, eventually bringing them to an abandoned hunter's cabin tucked into a hillside clearing. To Lily, the small wooden structure represented immediate shelter from the relentless rain. She tried the door, finding it stuck but not locked, and managed to push it open far enough to squeeze through with Rusty at her heels. Inside, the single room was dusty but dry, with an old wooden table, a rusty wood stove, and a collapsed cot in one corner. Cobwebs decorated the ceiling corners, but there were no signs of recent human visitation. "We can stay here until the rain stops," Lily told Rusty, pulling their provisions from her backpack. She spread his blanket on the cleanest patch of floor and carefully rationed 2 pieces of jerky, one for herself and small bits for Rusty, who accepted them delicately from her fingers. Outside, the storm continued unabated, rain drumming on the cabin's tin roof. Lily hadn't anticipated the cold that came with being wet for hours, and she began to shiver despite her layered clothing. Rusty sensed her discomfort, pressing his warm body against her side as they huddled on the blanket. As afternoon faded toward evening, Lily's initial confidence in her plan began to waver. "Dad will be really worried," she whispered to Rusty, who perked his large ears at her voice. "But I couldn't let him take you away. You're my only friend." The fox responded with a soft chirp, nuzzling against her hand. In that moment of connection, neither noticed the rising water outside as the creek overflowed its banks, surrounding the cabin that sat in a natural depression. It was Rusty who first sensed danger, suddenly alert and pacing toward the door with nervous energy. When Lily finally opened the door to investigate his concern, she found swirling brown water already several inches deep around the cabin's foundation and rising steadily. Even with her limited understanding of the situation, she recognized they couldn't stay. Gathering their belongings with shaking hands, she stepped out into ankle-deep water, Rusty leaping carefully from the doorway to avoid the flood. "We need to go uphill," Lily reasoned, remembering her father's instructions about flash floods. Sloshing through the rising water, she headed toward higher ground visible through the trees, Rusty leading the way with natural instinct for safer terrain. They had nearly reached the ridgeline when disaster struck. Rusty, ranging slightly ahead, suddenly yelped a sharp, pained sound unlike his usual vocalizations. Lily rushed forward to find him struggling against a metal trap that had clamped around his right front leg, its rusted teeth digging into flesh. Blood matted his red fur where he pulled desperately against the restraint, each movement causing fresh injury. "No," Lily cried, dropping to her knees beside him. "Don't move, Rusty, you'll make it worse." The trap was an old design, forgotten and abandoned by poachers years before. Its spring mechanism had remained operational despite exposure to the elements, waiting silently until Rusty's light step triggered its vicious jaws. Now it held him firmly, the chain staked into the ground preventing escape. Lily's first attempts to open the trap were futile. Her small fingers couldn't generate enough force to depress the powerful springs. Rusty's pain-filled eyes and increasingly frantic movements broke her heart, bringing tears that mingled with raindrops on her face. "I'll help you," she promised through her sobs. "I won't leave you." With determination beyond her years, Lily searched for a stick sturdy enough to use as a lever. Her first attempt snapped under pressure, but the second, a thick branch from a fallen oak, held as she wedged it between the trap's jaws and pushed with all her strength. The metal gave slightly, enough for Rusty to withdraw his injured paw with another sharp yelp. Free but wounded, Rusty limped in a circle, his injured leg held above the ground. The gash wasn't life-threatening, but it bled steadily, leaving scarlet droplets on fallen leaves. With gentle hands, Lily tore a strip from her shirt hem and wrapped it around Rusty's leg as she'd seen her father dress minor wounds, her touch careful and precise despite her trembling fingers. Night was falling now, darkness gathering between the trees while the rain continued unrelenting. The temperature dropped further and Lily's teeth chattered uncontrollably. Rusty, despite his injury, pressed against her legs as though trying to share what warmth he possessed. They needed shelter, but the cabin below was now surrounded by a lake of floodwater, unreachable and unsafe. "We have to keep going," Lily whispered, gathering Rusty carefully in her arms to protect his injured leg. "Just a little farther." Earl Peterson moved through the forest like the ghost of its past, silent, efficient, reading signs invisible to less experienced eyes. He'd dismissed the organized search patterns of the police and volunteers, instead following his own instincts honed by decades in these woods. The rain that hindered others merely confirmed his suspicions about which routes the girl might have taken. "Creek trail first," he muttered to himself, noting the partial footprint preserved in clay beneath an overhanging rock ledge. Small print. Could be her. Unlike the other searchers calling Lily's name and making noise to attract her attention, Earl moved quietly, listening for subtle sounds beneath the storm's backdrop. He'd tracked wounded deer through worse conditions, following blood trails diluted to nearly nothing. Finding one small girl with a fox shouldn't be impossible, especially since he suspected she wasn't trying to evade discovery but rather seeking shelter. When he found the fork in the trail, Earl immediately noted the right-hand path's recently disturbed mud. Most searchers would have continued straight or turned left toward town, logical choices for someone lost. But Earl understood the mind of a frightened child. The right fork led uphill, away from the visibly rising creek, a choice that made sense to someone seeking safety from water rather than trying to navigate home. As twilight deepened the forest shadows, Earl's flashlight beam caught an unnatural color against the browns and greens of the underbrush, a small scrap of fabric snagged on a thorny bush. The pink thread matched the description of Lily's jacket. He was on the right track. The old hunter quickened his pace, concern growing as he noted the rapidly deteriorating weather conditions. The Forest Service had issued flash flood warnings, and from his elevated position Earl could see water already pooling in the valley below. When he reached the clearing with the abandoned cabin, now an island in a newly formed pond, he knew the situation had become critical. The girl's not foolish enough to stay there, he reasoned aloud, scanning the hillside beyond. That's when he heard it, a sound too regular to be natural, too high-pitched to be an animal. A child crying. Following the sound, Earl crested a small ridge and directed his flashlight beam toward a hollow between two massive oak trees. There, huddled against the base of the larger trunk, sat Lily Morgan, her arms wrapped protectively around the fox, both soaked and shivering violently in the cold rain. "Lily," Earl called, keeping his voice gentle despite the urgency of the situation. "It's Mr. Peterson from town. Your dad sent me to find you." The girl's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. "Don't take Rusty," she pleaded, clutching the fox tighter. "They want to take him away." Earl approached slowly, setting his flashlight on a nearby stump so its beam illuminated the scene without blinding the frightened child. He noticed immediately the improvised bandage around the fox's leg, already soaked through with blood and rainwater. "What happened to him?" Earl asked, kneeling despite the protest of his arthritic joints. "Trap," Lily managed through chattering teeth. "It hurt him. I got him out." Something shifted in Earl's weathered face, a kind of recognition, perhaps even respect. He'd spent decades trapping and hunting forest creatures, seeing them primarily as resources or trophies. But the sight of this child's devotion to the injured fox, and the fox's clear attachment to her, challenged his long-held beliefs about the separation between humans and wild animals. "You did good getting him out," Earl said, unzipping his waterproof hunting jacket. "That takes courage. But now you're both in danger from this storm, and we need to get you home." Lily shook her head stubbornly, though her body betrayed her with increasingly violent shivers. "They'll take Rusty tomorrow. I won't let them." Earl considered the child and fox before him, weighing decades of belief against the undeniable evidence of his eyes. He'd reported the Morgans because he believed keeping wild animals as pets was wrong, dangerous for both parties. Yet here was evidence challenging that conviction, a fox that could have fled once free from the trap, but instead remained with the girl, and a child who risked everything to protect her unusual friend. "Listen to me, Lily," Earl said, his voice gruff but kind. "I made a mistake. I shouldn't have reported your fox without understanding the whole situation. I thought I was doing the right thing, but seeing you two together, well, I think I might have been wrong." He wrapped his jacket around Lily's shoulders, big enough to cover both her and Rusty. "I can't promise what will happen with the wildlife people, but I can promise I'll tell them what I saw tonight. How Rusty protected you, how you saved him from that trap. That's got to count for something." Lily studied his face with the intense focus characteristic of her condition, searching for deception and finding none. "You promise?" "I give you my word," Earl said, offering his hand as he would to any adult whose trust he sought to earn, her hunter's honor. After a moment's hesitation, Lily placed her small hand in his weathered palm, allowing him to help her to her feet while she cradled Rusty against her chest. The fox regarded Earl with suspicious eyes but made no attempt to escape Lily's gentle hold. My old cabin's not far, Earl explained, retrieving his flashlight. It's on higher ground, got a radio we can use to call your dad. And I've got a first aid kit for that leg. He nodded toward Rusty's injury. Your daddy's a vet, but I've patched up enough hunting dogs to know the basics. As they made their way carefully through the darkened forest, Earl found himself sharing knowledge he'd never thought to pass on, pointing out owl calls and identifying edible plants by flashlight. Lily absorbed every word with remarkable attention, asking questions that revealed an unexpected intelligence behind her reserved demeanor. By the time they reached Earl's well-maintained cabin, the old hunter had made a decision that would have shocked anyone who knew him. The fox that had begun as his reason for reporting the Morgans had somehow, in the space of an hour's trek through storming woods, become his reason for defending them. The relative safety of Earl Peterson's cabin provided only temporary respite. Using his emergency radio, Earl contacted the search teams, his gruff voice softening as he assured Robert that Lily was alive, if thoroughly chilled and exhausted. The news triggered an immediate redirection of resources, with emergency medical personnel dispatched to meet them as soon as feasible given the deteriorating conditions. While they waited, Earl attended to Rusty's injured leg with surprising gentleness, cleaning the wound with antiseptic and applying a proper bandage from his well-stocked first aid kit. Lily watched his every move with intense focus, occasionally offering quiet instructions based on procedures she'd observed in her father's clinic. Earl found himself impressed by her knowledge and calm demeanor despite the ordeal she'd endured. "Your fox is pretty tough," he told her, securing the bandage with medical tape. A trap like that would have had most animals chewing their own leg off in panic. Lily nodded solemnly. "Rusty's special. That's why I couldn't let him take him." Earl draped another blanket over her shoulders and added wood to the fire, concern growing as he noted her continued shivering and the flush developing across her pale cheeks. Despite the cabin's warmth, Lily's skin remained cold to the touch, and a troubling cough had developed in the hours since their arrival. When the rescue team finally reached them shortly before dawn, the paramedics immediately recognized signs of hypothermia and possible respiratory infection. Lily's temperature registered at 102.4 def, her breathing was labored, and the congestion in her lungs produced a worrying rattle that even Earl could hear without a stethoscope. "We need to get her to the hospital," the lead paramedic told Earl as they prepared the stretcher for transport. "Prolonged exposure in these conditions, especially for a child her age, it's potentially serious." Lily, drifting between consciousness and fevered sleep, clutched Rusty with surprising strength when they attempted to separate them for the journey. "No," she managed through chattering teeth. "Stays with me." "The fox needs veterinary attention," one paramedic pointed out, eyeing the blood-stained bandage. "Her father's a vet," Earl interjected. "And speaking as someone who just spent hours watching these two together, separating them now would do more harm than good." Against protocol, but acknowledging the unusual circumstances, the team allowed Rusty to remain with Lily during transport. The fox curled protectively against her side throughout the difficult journey back to civilization. At Oak Ridge Community Hospital, Robert was waiting when the ambulance arrived, his face haggard from hours of desperate searching. The relief at seeing his daughter alive quickly transformed to alarm as medical staff transferred her to a gurney, oxygen mask already in place over her small face. "Pneumonia," Dr. Winters explained after initial examination, her expression grave. "The exposure, combined with exhaustion and likely aspiration of creek water, has caused a severe infection in both lungs. We're starting her on broad-spectrum antibiotics and supplemental oxygen, but she'll need to remain hospitalized." Robert nodded numbly, watching through the glass as nurses established IV lines and monitoring equipment. Lily appeared impossibly small beneath the hospital blankets, her red hair splayed across the white pillow like autumn leaves on early snow. Rusty, surprisingly, had been permitted to remain in the room after Robert vouched for his vaccination status and general health, an unprecedented exception made due to Lily's distress when separation was attempted. The first night was the worst. Lily's fever spiked to 104 def despite medication, her oxygen levels repeatedly dropping to concerning thresholds. Robert maintained a sleepless vigil beside her bed, one hand holding hers while the other absently stroked Rusty, who refused to leave his position at the foot of the hospital bed despite his own injury. In her delirium, Lily called repeatedly for her mother, the fever temporarily dissolving the careful barriers her mind had constructed around that loss. "Mom? Mom, help Rusty," she murmured, her eyes open but unseeing. The trap hurt him. Fix him like Dad fixes animals. Each mention of Sarah drove another spike of guilt through Robert's heart. He'd failed to protect Lily from this additional trauma, but had allowed his determination to keep Rusty to overshadow the potential consequences of their increasingly desperate situation. "I'm sorry," he whispered to his unconscious daughter. "I was trying to do the right thing for you, but maybe I just made everything worse." By morning, Lily's condition had stabilized somewhat, though she remained on oxygen and intravenous antibiotics. Dr. Winters was cautiously optimistic but emphasized the severity of the infection. "Children can be remarkably resilient," she assured Robert, "but we're not out of the woods yet. The next 48 hours will be critical." Throughout that day and into the next, Lily drifted between consciousness and fevered sleep. During her lucid moments, her first concern was invariably for Rusty, her hand seeking his familiar fur even before fully opening her eyes. The fox displayed extraordinary patience, remaining still during medical procedures and moving only to allow healthcare workers access to Lily when necessary. Several of the nurses commented on the unusual relationship, with one veteran pediatric nurse observing, "In 30 years of practice, I've never seen an animal behave quite like this, almost as if he understands she's sick and needs him." On the third day of hospitalization, Robert stepped into the hallway to speak with Dr. Winters about Lily's latest test results, leaving Rusty curled beside the sleeping child. When he returned 10 minutes later, he found Lily awake and crying silently, her hand buried in Rusty's fur. "They're still going to take him away," she whispered hoarsely when she saw her father. "I heard the doctors talking. They said tomorrow is the deadline." Robert's heart sank. In the crisis of Lily's illness, he'd temporarily forgotten about Officer Thompson's 14-day notice, a deadline that had indeed arrived. Their permit application remained under review, with no decision yet communicated. "I can't lose Rusty too," Lily continued, her voice breaking. "Not after Mom. Please, Dad, please don't let him." The raw anguish in his daughter's plea crystallized Robert's resolve. He had respected laws and regulations his entire life, had built his veterinary practice on professional ethics and proper procedures. But watching his daughter, who had already endured more loss than any child should facing another devastating separation, he made a decision that contradicted his usual character. "I won't let him take him," Robert promised, his voice steady with newfound determination. "Whatever it takes, Lilypad, Rusty stays with us." The path forward remained unclear, but one thing was certain: Robert Morgan, who had always been the voice of reason and lawful compliance, was prepared to fight the system he'd previously respected without question. His daughter's tear-streaked face and the fox who had somehow become essential to her recovery had rewritten his understanding of right and wrong in ways he never could have anticipated. The morning that marked the end of their 14-day grace period brought unexpected visitors to Lily's hospital room. Robert looked up from his daughter's bedside to find Officer Thompson standing in the doorway, his uniform replaced by civilian clothes, jeans, and a button-down shirt that somehow made him appear more approachable yet equally authoritative. "Mr. Morgan," Thompson began formally, "I've come about the Fox situation. Given the circumstances, I thought a face-to-face conversation would be more appropriate than official correspondence." Robert stood protectively between the officer and Lily's bed, where Rusty remained curled beside her sleeping form. "My daughter is still recovering," he said, his voice low but firm. "Whatever needs to happen, I'd prefer we discuss it outside." Thompson nodded, following Robert into the hallway where an unexpected third person waited: Dr. Patricia Winters, Lily's attending physician. The three adults moved to a small consultation room nearby, the tension palpable as Robert closed the door behind them. "Before we begin the official business," Thompson said once they were seated, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have disclosed from the beginning." He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. "My full name is James Thompson Morgan. Sarah was my sister." Robert stared at him in stunned silence, mental pieces suddenly clicking into place, the vague familiarity he'd sensed upon their first meeting, the subtle resemblance to Sarah in the shape of the man's eyes and the set of his jaw. "That's not possible," Robert finally managed. "Sarah only had one brother, and he moved to Australia after college. We lost touch after the funeral." "I came back 6 months ago," Thompson explained, his professional demeanor cracking slightly. "Took the wildlife officer position here because I wanted to be closer to Sarah's memory, to Lily. But I didn't reach out because," his voice faltered momentarily, "because I blamed myself for not being here when Sarah died, for missing the funeral, for abandoning my family when they needed me." "You're Lily's Uncle James?" Robert asked incredulously. "All this time you've been enforcing this situation without telling us who you were." "I was doing my job," Thompson replied defensively. "The law doesn't change because of personal connections. If anything, I had to be more rigorous to avoid any appearance of favoritism." Dr. Winters, who had remained silent during this revelation, finally spoke. "Officer Thompson James came to me yesterday to discuss Lily's case from a medical perspective. That's when I realized the connection." "What connection?" Robert demanded, still reeling from the disclosure. Thompson's composed facade crumbled completely as he reached for his wallet, extracting a worn photograph and placing it on the table between them. "My daughter, Sophie. She would have been Lily's age." Robert picked up the photo, his anger temporarily displaced by the image of a smiling young girl with Thompson's eyes and an unmistakable resemblance to Lily. "Would have been?" "Leukemia," Thompson said quietly. 3 years ago in Melbourne. That's why I wasn't here when Sarah died. Sophie was in her final stages and I couldn't leave." His eyes, when they met Robert's, carried a weight of grief that mirrored Robert's own. "After Sophie died, her therapy Fox was the only thing that got me through those first months." "Therapy Fox?" Robert repeated, certain he had misheard. Thompson nodded. "Part of an experimental program at the Children's Hospital in Australia, similar to therapy dogs, but specifically for oncology patients who couldn't risk exposure to common canines due to compromised immune systems. Foxes carry fewer zoonotic diseases transmissible to humans." He took a deep breath. "When I saw Rusty with Lily, it hit too close to home. I had to enforce the law, but I also started looking for loopholes, exceptions, anything that might help your case." Robert sat back, absorbing this unexpected revelation. The man he'd viewed as their primary obstacle had actually been searching for a solution from the beginning, motivated by a loss that paralleled their own. "Why didn't you just tell me who you were?" Robert asked, his voice softer now. "Would it have made a difference?" Thompson countered. "Would you have trusted my judgment more, or just expected special treatment?" "I needed to handle this by the book, for Lily's sake as much as for regulatory compliance." Dr. Winters cleared her throat gently. "I suggested Officer Thompson disclose his relationship now because Lily's medical condition offers a potential path forward. Her response to Rusty's presence during treatment has been remarkable. Her vital signs stabilize when he's near, her anxiety decreases, and her cooperation with painful procedures improves significantly." "You're suggesting therapeutic justification for keeping Rusty?" Robert asked, hope cautiously entering his voice. "It's one option we're exploring," Thompson confirmed. "But there's more you need to know about your unusual fox before we make any decisions." The conversation paused as Thompson retrieved a folder from his briefcase, laying it open on the table. Inside were photographs, maps, and scientific data sheets that Robert immediately recognized as wildlife population studies. "When your DNA results confirmed Rusty as a red fox, I sent the genetic profile to Dr. Emily Waters for further analysis," Thompson explained. standard procedure for unusual specimens. Her findings were unexpected. He pushed forward a document bearing the university's official letterhead. According to Dr. Waters, Rusty's genetic markers identify him as Vulpes vulpes appalachia, an eastern mountain fox subspecies believed to be extinct in this region for nearly 50 years. Robert skimmed the scientific notation, his veterinary training allowing him to grasp the significance of the genetic markers highlighted in the report. This can't be right. That subspecies was documented as functionally extinct in the 1970s due to overhunting and habitat loss. Apparently, a small population survived in isolated pockets, Thompson replied. The development project threatening Whispering Pines Forest has inadvertently driven them into contact with populated areas again, likely including Rusty's mother, who must have abandoned or lost him during the storm. The implications settled over Robert like a physical weight. So Rusty isn't just any fox, he's part of a subspecies conservationists thought was gone forever. Exactly, Thompson confirmed, which changes everything about his legal status. Endangered subspecies fall under different regulatory frameworks than common wildlife. There are research exemptions, conservation protocols, and a substantially stronger case for your permit application, Dr. Winters added, especially when combined with the therapeutic benefit to Lily. Thompson nodded, continuing his explanation. Dr. Waters is seeking an emergency conservation designation that would protect both Rusty and any remaining population in Whispering Pines Forest. The university has already expressed interest in studying Rusty's behavior, adaptation to domestic settings, and of course his unique bond with Lily. The genetic report included comparison photographs of historical Appalachian fox specimens alongside recent images of Rusty, highlighting the distinctive ear shape, muzzle length, the horn, and fur coloration that differentiated the subspecies from common red foxes. The scientific evidence was compelling and opened unexpected possibilities. The university's involvement has attracted attention from regional media, Thompson added, showing Robert several newspaper clippings and printouts from environmental websites. The story has resonated beyond our little town, a presumed extinct fox subspecies, saved by a child with autism, now potentially contributing to both wildlife conservation and therapeutic advancements. For the first time in weeks, Robert felt genuine hope for a resolution that wouldn't tear Lily's world apart again. So what happens now? Dr. Waters is coming tomorrow to conduct a formal assessment, Thompson explained. She'll document Rusty's condition, behavior, and interaction with Lily as part of the conservation exemption application. If approved, it would supersede standard wildlife regulations with a specialized research and rehabilitation permit. Robert shook his head in disbelief at the sudden change in their prospects. All this time I've been fighting to keep Rusty because of what he means to Lily. I never imagined he might have scientific significance beyond our family situation. Sometimes the most meaningful discoveries happen by accident, Dr. Winters observed with a small smile. But there's one more complication you should be aware of. Thompson hesitated before opening a final folder containing several grainy photographs taken by motion-activated wildlife cameras. These were captured 3 nights ago at the edge of your property while you were here at the hospital with Lily. Robert leaned forward, studying the images with growing amazement. They are clearly visible, despite the low light, was an adult fox with the same distinctive features as Rusty watching the house from the forest edge, her posture alert and purposeful. We believe this is Rusty's mother, Thompson said quietly. She's been documented in the same location 4 nights in a row, always during the same nighttime hours. The behavior suggests she's searching for something or someone. Robert's throat tightened as he looked at the fox's intelligent eyes, so similar to Rusty's. She's looking for her kit. After all this time. Fox mothers maintain strong bonds with their young, Thompson confirmed. In the wild, kits typically stay with their mothers for several months before becoming independent. Based on Rusty's estimated age when you found him, he would still have been dependent on her. The implications of this discovery settled heavily in the room. The fight to keep Rusty had focused entirely on Lily's needs and legal regulations. Not once had they seriously considered what might be best for the fox himself. "What do we do with this information?" Robert asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily would be devastated to lose Rusty, but keeping him from his natural mother, his family. "That's the moral question at the center of this situation," Thompson acknowledged. "As a wildlife officer, my responsibility is to advocate for the animal's natural interests. As Lily's uncle, I understand the therapeutic relationship that's developed. There's no easy answer here." Dr. Winters, who had been taking notes throughout the discussion, looked up thoughtfully. "Perhaps the solution isn't an either-or scenario. The property borders the forest. Is there a possibility for controlled interaction? A middle path that respects both the human and animal bonds that have formed?" Robert considered this unexpected suggestion, imagining what it might mean for their future. The mother fox's appearance added a new dimension to an already complex situation, one that would require careful explanation to Lily when she was well enough to understand. "I think," Robert said slowly, "we need to consider what's truly best for both Lily and Rusty. Even if that means making difficult choices neither of us anticipated." 2 weeks after Lily's release from the hospital, the Morgan family faced their moment of truth in the wood-paneled meeting room of the Oak Ridge Municipal Building. The special hearing for Rusty's permit had drawn an unexpected crowd, not just local officials and interested neighbors, but representatives from regional conservation groups, Coburn, the state university, and even a documentary filmmaker who'd caught wind of the unusual case. At the center of the room, a long table seated the 5-person Wildlife Commission tasked with determining Rusty's fate. Their expressions revealed nothing as Robert and Lily entered, the young girl still pale from her illness but determinedly walking on her own, her hand firmly clasped in her father's. Rusty remained at home under Earl Peterson's watchful eye. Animals weren't permitted in the municipal building, regardless of their endangered status. "This special session is called to order," announced Chairwoman Sullivan, a stern-faced woman with 3 decades of conservation experience. "We're here to consider application number WEL 254, requesting an exemption to state wildlife regulations for the purpose of maintaining a red fox in a domestic setting." The formal proceedings began with a review of the application materials, followed by statements from wildlife experts regarding the usual protocols for handling wild animals. Throughout these opening remarks, Lily sat quietly beside her father, occasionally whispering questions that Robert answered in hushed tones. If she was intimidated by the formal setting or the crowd of strangers, she showed no sign. Her focus remained entirely on the outcome that would determine Rusty's future. When the time came for public testimony, the commission's secretary called the first unexpected name. The board recognizes Eleanor Simpson. The retired school principal approached the podium with measured steps, her silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "I've known the Morgan family for many years," she began, her educator's voice carrying clearly through the room. "I was principal when Sarah Morgan taught science at our elementary school, and I've watched Lily since she was a toddler. What I can tell you with absolute certainty is that the transformation in this child since Rusty entered her life is nothing short of remarkable." Eleanor detailed specific improvements in Lily's communication, social interaction, and emotional regulation, changes documented by teachers, therapists, and school records in my 40 years of education. She concluded, "I've never witnessed such profound progress in a child with Lily's challenges. To separate them now would be to dismantle the bridge that has connected this little girl back to the world after unimaginable loss." Several other community members followed with similarly supportive testimony, including Lily's current teacher and speech therapist. Then came a name that caused murmurs of surprise. The board recognizes Earl Peterson. The elderly hunter approached the podium with deliberate steps, his weathered face solemn beneath his customary cap. For a moment he simply stood there, gathering his thoughts as he surveyed the room. Then he cleared his throat and began speaking in a voice rough with emotion. "I've lived in these mountains for 78 years, he stated plainly. Hunted these woods since I was old enough to hold a rifle. I know wild animals, their ways, their nature. I've trapped more foxes than anyone in this county. He paused, his gaze finding Lily in the audience. "And I'm the one who reported the Morgans for keeping that fox. Thought I was doing the right thing." The commission members leaned forward slightly, clearly surprised by this admission. "But I was wrong," Earl continued, his voice cracking slightly. "I know that now because I saw something in that forest during the storm that changed everything I thought I understood about animals and humans." With simple, powerful language, Earl recounted finding Lily and Rusty in the forest, the girl who had freed her friend from a trap and bandaged his wounds, and the fox who had stayed faithfully by her side despite his injury and instinct to flee. That fox could have run the minute he was free, Earl emphasized, tapping the podium for emphasis. Nothing holding him there except his bond with that little girl. "In all my years, I've never seen anything like it." His voice dropped lower, thick with emotion. "When I found them, that fox was trying to keep her warm, pressed up against her even though he was hurt. He knows she saved him, and he was trying to save her right back." Earl removed his cap, clutching it in his weathered hands. "I've taken a lot from these forests over my lifetime. Seems right that my last act regarding these creatures might be helping to save one, and the little girl who loves him." The room remained silent for several moments after Earl returned to his seat, the simple sincerity of his testimony lingering in the air. Even Chairwoman Sullivan appeared moved, removing her glasses to wipe them methodically before calling the next speaker. Dr. Emily Waters approached the podium with professional composure, her presentation materials already displayed on the room's projection screen. With scientific precision, she outlined the genetic evidence confirming Rusty's status as part of the Appalachian mountain fox subspecies, emphasizing the conservation value of studying his development and behavior beyond the educational and therapeutic considerations. She concluded, "Maintaining this fox in his current environment offers unprecedented research opportunities. The Morgan property's location at the forest edge would allow for controlled interaction studies between Rusty and any remaining wild population, particularly the adult female fox that appears to be his." Mother. When all scheduled testimonies concluded, Chairwoman Sullivan asked if there were any final statements before the commission began deliberations. To everyone's surprise, a small voice spoke up from the audience. "I'd like to say something, please." All eyes turned to Lily Morgan, her hand raised in the precise way she'd been taught at school. After a moment of hesitation, Sullivan nodded. "The commission recognizes Lily Morgan." Robert helped his daughter to the podium, which stood nearly as tall as she did. Finding her too short to reach the microphone, he moved to lift her, but Lily shook her head determinedly. Instead, Sullivan directed a commission member to adjust the microphone downward to accommodate the child's height. "My name is Lily Morgan," she began, her voice small but steady. "I'm 7 years old, and Rusty is my best friend. I found him in the rain when he was all alone, just like I felt all alone after my mom died." The room fell completely silent, adults leaning forward to catch every word from this unexpected speaker. "Rusty helped me when I was sad. He listens when I read books. He doesn't mind when I can't look at his eyes. He makes the bad feelings smaller." Lily paused, gathering her thoughts with visible effort. "I wanted to keep him forever because I love him." Robert watched his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern, recognizing the significance of her public speech, something that would have been unthinkable months earlier. "But then Dad showed me the pictures of Rusty's mom," Lily continued, her voice wavering slightly. "She's been looking for him every night. She misses him, just like I miss my mom." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back with determination. "I don't want Rusty's mom to be sad anymore. I know what that feels like. It hurts here." She pressed a small hand against her chest. Robert knelt beside his daughter, ready to support her if the emotion became too overwhelming, but Lily straightened her shoulders and continued. "I want Rusty to be able to see his mom. And I want to see him too." She looked directly at the commission members, making rare eye contact that emphasized the importance of her next words. "Can we share him, please?" From her pocket, Lily withdrew a small fabric bundle, carefully unfolding it to reveal a faded blue scarf. This was my mom's. It still smells like her. When I'm scared or sad, it helps me feel better. With deliberate movements, she refolded the scarf and placed it on the podium. I want Rusty to have it, so if he goes with his mom sometimes he can remember me. And maybe not be scared. There wasn't a dry eye in the room as Lily returned to her seat, the simple eloquence of her proposal hanging in the air. Robert put his arm around her shoulders, blinking back his own tears at this unexpected demonstration of his daughter's growth and compassion. The commission's deliberation lasted less than 30 minutes, a record for such complex cases. When they returned, Chairwoman Sullivan announced their decision with uncharacteristic emotion in her voice. In consideration of the unique circumstances of this case, including conservation value, educational opportunities, and demonstrated therapeutic benefit, this commission approves application W254 with the following modifications. She outlined their unprecedented solution. The Morgan property would be designated as a special conservation research area, with Robert granted a limited wildlife rehabilitation license. Rusty would remain primarily with the Morgans, but specialized access points would be constructed along the forest border to allow for monitored interaction with the wild fox population, particularly his mother. This arrangement acknowledges both the human bond that has formed and the natural familial connection that deserves respect, Sullivan explained. It represents a collaborative approach between human needs and wildlife conservation that this commission believes serves the highest good of all parties involved. The conservation program required structural modifications to the Morgan property, a specialized enclosure connected to both house and forest, camera monitoring systems for research purposes, and regular veterinary documentation. The university would provide funding through research grants, while Officer Thompson would oversee compliance and safety protocols. 1 year later, as spring painted Whispering Pines forest in vibrant greens, Robert Morgan stood on his back porch watching his daughter reading aloud from her favorite book. Beside her, Rusty lay attentively listening, his red coat gleaming in the dappled sunlight. At the edge of their newly constructed fox transition habitat, another russet form moved cautiously, the mother fox, but no longer just a nighttime visitor but a regular presence in their unconventional family arrangement. The past year had brought changes no one could have anticipated. The discovery of the Appalachian fox subspecies had halted the development project threatening the forest, resulting instead in a protected wildlife corridor. Earl Peterson, surprisingly, had become one of the program's most dedicated volunteers, his hunting expertise repurposed for tracking and monitoring the small but growing fox population. Most remarkable was Lily's continued development. Now 8, she spoke regularly and confidently, particularly when explaining her foxes to visiting researchers and classmates during the educational programs they occasionally hosted. Her special connection with Rusty remained, but she had expanded her world to include new friendships at school and a deepening relationship with her Uncle James, who visited regularly. Rusty himself had established a unique pattern, spending days with Lily and nights exploring the forest with his mother and recently discovered siblings. He navigated between human and fox societies with remarkable adaptability, returning faithfully each morning as though understanding the gift of his dual existence. "Time for dinner, Lilypad," Robert called, smiling as his daughter gathered her books. Rusty trotted beside her as she approached, the faded blue scarf she'd once offered as a goodbye gift now serving as a distinctive marker on his special harness, a symbol of the compromise that had brought healing to both human and animal families. As they entered the house together, Robert glanced back at the forest edge where the mother fox still watched. He raised his hand in a gesture of acknowledgement, receiving in return the steady gaze of a wild creature who had somehow become part of their extended family. Different worlds, connected through understanding and compassion. In the kitchen, Lily chattered about her day at school while helping set the table, ordinary moments that had once seemed impossible. Through the window, the setting sun painted the forest in golden light, illuminating the path between wild and tame, loss and discovery, ending and beginning. In Lily and Rusty's journey, we discover that the most profound connections in life often transcend our expectations and challenge our long-held beliefs. Their story reminds us that at any age we can still open our hearts to unexpected relationships that heal our deepest wounds. Just as Earl Peterson found wisdom in his twilight years by questioning his lifelong assumptions, we too are never too old to learn, to change, and to grow. Life's most difficult moments, like Lily's loss of her mother or Rusty's separation from his family, can lead to beautiful new beginnings when we approach them with compassion and deep understanding. The compromise solution that allowed both human and animal families to heal together shows us that even when facing impossible choices, the creative solutions exist when we prioritize love over rigid thinking. As we navigate our own autumn years, may we remember that the bonds we create with others, whether human or animal, are what truly sustain us through life's storms. Sometimes the greatest act of love is allowing those we care for the freedom to exist in two worlds, just as the greatest wisdom comes from recognizing that nature and humanity can thrive together when we approach both with respect and open hearts. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.